Thank you everyone for attending this webinar. My name is Ross Shane. I'm with Boris Effects, and my partner here in crime is Mary Poplin, who you might know from many of the Mocha videos that you see on our website. Today we're going to be focusing on the object removal, the remove module, in Mocha Pro. This is probably one of the most interesting aspects about the Mocha software that people always have a lot of questions. So we thought we'd really dive in specifically and show you guys how to really take advantage of this very unique tool. So the webinar is in listen only mode. If you have any questions, I'm going to be answering questions in the chat area. And Mary, if you want to advance the slide.
Sure.
Yeah, so we're going to be covering basically the remove module, which is found inside of Mocha Pro. The remove module is based on planar tracking and uses temporal frames found in the clip. So that means if there's clean areas in the clip and you have good tracking in the background, you're going to be able to use this module to actually remove foreground objects. We're also going to cover a little bit of clean plating with Photoshop, how to do some more complex removes. Like Mary has a great example where she removes an object that's underneath some shadows, and some basic advanced techniques to basically optimize and learn how to use this tool much faster. So let's keep going, Mary.
Got it.
Okay, so again, please feel free to use the chat area on the side. We'll answer your questions. So again, we're in listen only mode. And you can basically find lots of information about our products on boriseffects.com. We are going to be giving away some really exciting prizes here, a full suite of Boris Effects, Mocha Pro, one-year subscription to Sapphire, which is our flagship plugins for visual effects and motion graphics, and a one-year subscription to Boris Continuum, which is our flagship product for editors and finishers. So at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, Mary. And again, thanks a lot for coming.
All right. Well, thanks, Ross. And hi, guys. For those of y'all that have heard me before, I'm Mary Poplin. For those of you that haven't heard me before, same thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over the remove module, and I'm going to start with the basics, like Ross said. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you, for example, in this sort of shot. This is a common use scenario where you have an object in the background that's kind of distracting from your shot and you want to remove it. Well, you can use the remove module to remove this type of object. And we're going to talk about, actually, I want to start with this example because that one requires a clean plate. We're going to start with this example because this is how to remove a car from the road. And we're going to show that because this is how to do it automatically, and then we'll show a clean plate. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the background pixels in this shot to replace this car. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to track the background. So when we're done, we'll end up with something that looks like this. And what you want to do is you want to set this up in Mocha. So we're going to go ahead and turn our renderer off. Let's jump to our remove. And I'm going to actually do this from scratch for you guys. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select our layer inside of After Effects, but this doesn't just have to be After Effects. It works inside of Avid Media Composer. It works inside of Premiere and other hosts like Nuke. So we're going to go to Effect, Mocha by Imaginary Systems, and select Mocha Pro. Now that we have Mocha Pro as a plugin applied to our footage, we can actually read from the timeline. Now, if I have this on half res, for example, like in proxy mode, and I hit launch Mocha, you'll see that it says, hey, confirm that you want to track this in half res. That's because what it actually does is Mocha reads from your timeline and renders back to your timeline when you're done. So we're going to actually close this and we're going to go to full res. Now that I'm on full res, I'm going to hit Launch Mocha Pro. You will see that warning will not come up. It's not an error, it's a warning. And now we will read our footage directly from our timeline. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to track this car. So let's find a good place to start tracking it from. When you're tracking in Mocha, just as a beginner, I just want to point out that Mocha is a planar tracker, okay? And we're going to use X-splines to track our objects. Mocha is a texture tracker. That means when we track an object, we want to track the pattern of pixels that's moving through the scene. and those pattern of pixels need to be moving in the same direction. We get away with tracking this car even though it's multiplanar because we're actually only going to track translation, scale, and rotation, which means we can fudge it a little bit. If we were tracking shear and perspective, we definitely need to stick to one plane at a time. And by one plane, I mean break your shot up into the most basic shapes. So if you look at this hill here, this is about 45 degrees to this ground plane, and so is this. So this is about 180 degrees, and this is about 45 degrees to that 180 degrees. So when I talk about planes, I want you to recognize that sort of geometry. Now we're going to track translation, scale, and rotation. What you'll notice is that the minimum percent of pixels used is automatically adjusted for me. If I drew a super small shape, it would be a high number. If I drew a very large shape, it would be a very low number, and that's because Mocha is trying to save me time. If you find that your track is slipping though, you can always increase this number. We're going to go ahead and hit track backwards, and we're going to let Mocha follow this object as it moves through the scene. There we go. Sometimes it takes a second for the tracker to catch up. And you can see that it's not glued to the object perfectly. That's because we're actually tracking that pattern. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to adjust this rotoscoping. So here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to go to my original frame, and I'm going to use this auto stabilize or quick stabilize mode. I'm going to use my zoom tool and zoom in on this car. Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to have this car pinned into the middle of our screen so we can rotoscope really quickly. So I'm going to go to the end of this shot, and I feel like I can add a little keyframe here. That's automatic keyframing, and now I can just scoot it off the edge of the view screen. Now I'm going to trim my layer just by hitting the set layer out point right here in layer properties, and I'm going to adjust my roto shapes through the scene. We want to make sure that we get all of the car inside of our rotoscoping shape. We also want to make sure that we go ahead and grab all of this shadow that the car is casting. Now, if you look really closely, you can see that there's quite a bit of shadow that the car is casting, and you want to make sure that you grab all of that, because if you leave it on the background, Mocha is a machine, and while it is, a pretty advanced bit of computer vision, it is not using a sort of optical flow to tell what's going on in the background further than what you tell it to do. So because it's a computer, it believes you when you tell it to remove those pixels. So make sure that you're telling it to remove the right pixels and not leaving things like shadows or motion blur on the background. Now we're going to go ahead and pull that out. And again, we're going to correct our roto shape just like this.
Hey, Mary, you mind if I jump in while you go? A couple people on the comments have said they feel you're going a little fast, so I'm just going to ask you to slow down a little bit. But just to reiterate kind of what Mary is doing here, and also I want to save her voice because she's battling a little cold, is Mary is basically using Mocha to get a good garbage matte, and because basically the car in the shot is the object that she wants to remove. So that's the first thing that she's focusing on.
Right. And sorry if I'm going too fast, guys. I've got a lot to cover, so I'll slow down and we'll just cover what we cover. All right, so the reason that I'm rotoscoping this car first is because I'm fixing to have to track this background. So now that I have my car and all of the shadows that the car is casting completely inside of this shape, I'm going to go ahead and turn my quick stabilize off, which is right here, and that's our car roto. Now I'm going to draw my background track. So we're going to look at all of these pixels in order to track the motion moving behind the car so that we can use all of these pixels to replace these pixels. So we're going to arrange this. We're going to call this car remove. It's very important to name your layers, especially if you work with other people. We're going to call this background. Nobody wants to have a layer, a Mocha file given to them with layer 1 through 27 unlabeled. So we're going to call this background, and we're going to drag background under the car, right? So the reason we do that is because Mocha treats everything at the top of the layer pile as closest to the camera, and it treats everything at the bottom of the layer pile as furthest from the camera. That means that it will also hold out all of the foreground objects from the background objects. So if you rotoscope from the foreground to the background like I just did, what you will have is you will have hold out mattes for your entire shot. So now we're going to track this background, but we're going to track translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. And we're going to turn our surface tool on here and our grid tool on. We're going to align our surface and grid tool to the bottom of our road. We don't do that for Mocha, we actually do that for ourselves. And notice again that Mocha has saved me from myself and selected less pixels so that when we track, we're going to track a little bit faster. I'm going to go ahead and hit and turn the gear off for car remove because I don't want to track the car twice. I'm going to turn my matte off for my background track, and I'm going to hit track forward. And Ross, is that slow enough, or do you feel like we're getting the point a little bit better?
Yeah, I think you're probably going still a little fast, but I know that's your tendency just in general, and I know we have a lot of viewers coming from different countries. So, but yeah, just I'll kind of reiterate what Mary's doing here is she already created the garbage mat for the car. She turned the gear off on that garbage mat layer, and she made sure that that layer was above the road track. So basically, the way Mocha sets up its layers is quite important for occluded objects. So the road track is actually placed below the car because the car is closer to the camera.
Right,
So now,
exactly.
yeah, I'll do the Mary translation.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about and that I'm not, motor mouthing too hard. I understand that for people who English is not their first language, it's going to be a little rough for them, so I will attempt to slow down my speech.
Cool. We're getting comments that everything's cool and a lot of people appreciate the speed. So it's to each their own. Let's keep going.
Okay, perfect. So once our track is complete, what we're going to do, and we really didn't have to finish tracking the entire end of the shot, but I just let it go anyway. We really just only needed to track to here to remove it because these are the only pixels we're going to be using to remove. But what we're going to do is we're going to use these pixels now to replace those top pixels. So we're going to select our car remove, and it is actually just this easy. We're going to turn our overlays off so that you can see what we're removing as we remove it, and we're going to do some test renders. So I'm going to jump to my remove tab. In my remove tab, I'm not going to actually adjust any settings because this is such a simple shot. And again, it's only a simple shot because we have all these background pixels to replace this object. Because this object is moving over our background pixels, we can see behind it. That means Mocha can see behind it. So we're just going to hit render. And Mocha's going to look at all those background pixels to replace our foreground pictures. We're going to hit render again somewhere later down in our timeline. And we're just going to double check and make sure that this is removing, which it looks like it is. So now we're going to hit save and close. Excuse me. Thank you. And inside of our plugin, we're going to use our drop-down menu to hit render, and we're going to go to remove. So we're going to check render and check remove, and it will actually render back to our timeline. We can even render this in quarter res if we want it to play super fast. So we can just see a little proxy, right? Excuse me. Sometimes when we do it in quarter res, it doesn't look very good because it's actually using quarter res to replace it. So let's just go from the start. There we go. So now if we play at full res, we can see that we're getting a really nice remove here for our car as it renders back to our timeline. Now I've actually already rendered this for you so that you don't have to sit through the render instead of After Effects. So here's our end result. All
Very
right,
cool,
now
Mary.
what we're going to
Very
do.
cool, Mary. Yeah, and I think important thing to note here, and sorry to jump over you, is that everything you're showing here, you're showing it inside of the Mocha Pro plugin, inside of Adobe After Effects. Someone was asking earlier in the text about Premiere. This will actually work inside of Premiere Pro, inside of Avid, inside of Nuke, inside of Fusion, or inside of the standalone application. So that remove module will work in many, many hosts.
Exactly. Thank you for pointing that out. All right, so we're going to move on to a slightly more complex remove. And by slightly more complex, I mean so this is great. You can see the planar data that moves behind the object. So Mocha can see behind it, so we can automatically remove it. Perfect, yay. All right. Now, what happens when we're in a less than ideal situation, which is going to be, the bulk of your shots? Well, let's talk about that. Let's move over to our desert background remove. This is what I had originally started on without, I sort of got ahead of myself, but we're going to take this shot, and this, looks like it's shot for a car commercial. And let's say you're in your edit and your director comes up behind you and he's like, hey, can we do something about this distracting car back here? I want to be focusing on this L200, not this little SUV in the background. So yes, there is something we can do about it, and let me show you what we can do. We're going to come over here to our desert remove, and here's what our final render looks like. I'm just going to show you how we do this. We're going to select our desert remove, and let's actually open our shot here. And let's go to our selected layer. This is your drop-down menu where you can view different views. If you have a remove rendered, it will show you your render, but because we don't have a remove rendered yet, we're just going to do selected layer. The reason we don't have a remove rendered is because, again, this is the plugin, and we are rendering back to the timeline when we do this. So I want to point out a couple of things real quick. If we are going to do this shot from scratch, and I'm not going to do this shot totally from scratch because it takes a minute to do, but I am going to show you some concepts. So if we want to remove this object, we have a problem in that we have a car that moves right over our object. So that means that if we tried to just remove this car, we would have this car interrupting our background pixels, and also, you know, it's going to be contaminating this background shape as well. So what I would do is I would start to draw some remove shapes around my car, and we're going to do this to hold this car out from our remove background. Now, we don't have to be perfect on the car, we just really need to be perfect about the areas that move over this background area. So if I were going to hit track forward, we would start following this car. Now, getting the roto on this perfect takes some time, so I'm not going to make you sit through that, but what I am going to show you is what the final roto looks like. What we've done is we've rotoscoped this little antenna here on the top of the car for each little moment that it goes over that car. And we have rotoscoped this mirror as well because it moves separately from the rest of the car. And we've rotoscoped the top of this car. Notice I split those roto shapes into 3 different shapes, and I really only worried about them where they went over this car. Now, the reason I split them up into 3 shapes is because I used Mocha to drive my rotoscope, which means you can tell I'm using way less keyframes because we're basing those keyframes off the track. All right, does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that before we move on?
No, I think you're doing great. Yeah, just to kind of reiterate what you're doing, kind of very similar to the last example where you removed the foreground car from the road. In this example, you have multiple masks, right? Because you want to basically make sure that you can get a good track behind this large truck. And you've broken up the shapes into multiple layers because of the different kind of planar motion.
Exactly. Now that I've done that, I can actually draw a new shape for my background. So let's just zoom out and let's draw a shape around this whole background area. Now I can track this. Now, because this is actually does not have a lot of shear and perspective data moving on this background, I'm just going to track translation, scale, and rotation, and I'm going to move it underneath all of my roto. And I'm going to call this BG track, okay? Now, notice that I did not draw a shape around the car before I drew a shape around the background track. That's because I don't have to hold that car out from the background in order to get a good track on this background, because the car is not moving over the top of it. It's practically part of the background. So we're going to hit track forward. And if you look at our track, by turning our surface and grid tool on, I want to point out that the surface and grid tool are the only things that will accurately show you what the track is doing. If you try to rely on what the shape is doing, you will be disappointed because the shape can be animated, whereas the track is actually the data itself inside of Mocha's little brain. So what that means is that we can adjust that shape at any time during the track to get a better track, but the surface and grid tool are the reflections of what the track is actually doing. So once we have completed this track, we're going to be able to actually link our remove shape to this background track, and I'm going to show you that using the layer properties over here. So layer properties are where you can start to adjust various properties about your layer. So you can come in here and you can actually make an insert clip. If we were doing an insert, you could actually read that right from your timeline. We're not going to do that though. We're actually going to just go ahead and use link to track. Link to track is going to be how we link this foreground track to our background track once this is complete. Ross, is that still making sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me, and I believe, yeah, no specific questions about it yet. So yeah, you're getting a good track for that the plane in the background, and I believe the next thing someone was asking earlier, well, could Mocha remove a logo from a shoe, from a sneaker? And the answers that I came up with, and a couple other people, are basically, well, if that that sneaker, if that logo, we don't have any frames where that that the logo doesn't exist, right? So in this
Right.
example, we don't have any frames where that in the shot where that background truck doesn't exist. So that's where
Mm-hmm.
I think the next step is the fun part where it comes into the clean plating.
Exactly. I think I might just to sort of answer that question about the logo. Yes, you can use the remove tool for it, but on a sneaker, there's going to be a lot of motion blur, and it might actually be a better job for the insert tool. But you could use this technique as well. So the technique I'm fixing to show you is going to be linked to foreground track. Did you have something to add, Ross?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, exactly. Just making the point though that if the clean frames do not exist in time within the shot, you do have to manually create them somehow with paint or clone techniques.
Exactly. And we're going to do that right now. So I'm going to draw a shape right around my car right here. And it does not have to be a good shape. It just has to be a shape that encompasses the car. It doesn't need to be tight on the edge. And in fact, it's better that it's not tight on the edge because that gives you more blend room. So now we're going to call this car. And we're going to go ahead and take car and we're going to drag it down. We're going to call this BG car actually because we have a car for the front. Now we're going to take BG car and we're going to go to link to track and we're going to link BG car to BG track. All right, so now our rotor shape follows our car through the shot. Now I see that I actually missed this little carriage on top of the car, so we're going to hit Uber key. We're going to pull that out, and what that'll do is that'll actually alter my shape for the entirety of the shot. That's the power of Uber key. Uber key allows you to do a ripple offset through the entirety of your timeline, even if you have keyframes on top of it. So now that we have BG car and our background track behind it, we're going to use all of these pixels to replace these pixels while holding out all of these pixels, okay? So let me just turn my all mats off and do just selected mats. So again, these pixels to replace these pixels, holding out all of these pixels. That makes more sense. All right, so we're going to jump to our remove tab. Inside of my remove tab, watch what happens if I just hit render. Literally nothing. All right. Now, the reason for that is because we don't have any pixels to replace this with, so we're going to have to invent them. So I'm going to hit create clean plate. And now I'm just going to save it to the desktop because this is a webinar. Never do this. Do as I say, not as I do. We're just going to save this clean plate to the desktop for this webinar only. Otherwise, you would save it to a folder, in your pipeline. And we're going to save this clean plate. And now I'm going to open Photoshop. Inside of Photoshop, I'm actually going to open up this clean plate. And we are going to paint this out with the clone tool. You could also paint this out technically inside of After Effects, or you could do an offset inside of Premiere and then, comp the layers together into a little, what do you call that in Premiere, Ross? Where you mix down two tracks.
Oh, you can do a nest if you wanted to take two layers and nest it into one layer, kind of like a pre-comp.
Right. So, or you could paint it out in Nuke if you were in that. But we're going to use Photoshop because this is like the easiest way. So I'm going to take this car and I'm going to paint it out. So let's go ahead and use our clone tool. We obviously want to make sure that we have a space where we can see the entire car if we want to paint it out. And we're just going to paint over the top of this. Now, this is probably going to be the world's quickest and dirtiest paint out. So, I don't want to spend too much time teaching you how to paint in Photoshop. But suffice to say, we're just going to, excuse me, it's not. I say that and then I'm still going to try to do a good job in here because I want to illustrate the point. Let's just come over here, paint that out. There we go. Helps if you hum to yourself, I find.
I know you like to use the heel brush as well, Mary, right? A little combination
I
of
do.
rubber stamping and heel brush and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and the reason I like to use the heel brush is because the heel brush actually hides a lot of sins. If you like for instance with this ground, if I feel like I want it to blend a little bit better on the ground, I can come in here and take the heel brush and I can take, like this ground section and run it over here and you see how it blends it really nicely into the bush. That's why I like the heal tool. So now that I have, some nice bushes to replace my little, area with, let's undo that. Let's actually just smooth this out. I want it to be as, inobtrusive as possible. So now that we have this nice little car removed frame where we can see what's behind the car, we're going to hit save. And now back inside of After Effects, we don't even have to reload it. It's actually already in my clean plates if you click on your edit clean plates here. And this is really important. We're going to use clean plates exclusively because we don't want to tell Mocha to use other frames to replace this. We want to tell it to use the clean plate only. All right, and we are not going to use illumination modeling on this because we actually don't need to, because this is a fairly constantly lit shot. If we needed to use illumination modeling, I'll show you what that looks like in a later shot. So we're going to hit render and do a little check. It removes the object, which is great. So we're going to save this. And we're going to close it. Perfect. And now After Effects is going to try to save me for myself and auto save my project. So give me 1 second. There we are. Now we're going to check render remove and turn that on. And Mocha should remove my car for me right from the background. And so this is what the render ends up looking like if we play. You can see that we're holding the car out from that remove, and we're getting a nice, clean background replace. So that's how you use a clean plate when you can't see behind the object. So what we did is we invented those pixels that Mocha would normally not be able to see. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. I know there's some people who are struggling with the streaming quality, and I think that's probably your local connections. But yeah, no, it's an excellent example of showing how you painted just one clean frame and using that tracking data of the plane. Again, the pixels behind the truck were tracked, and as well as you've used the foreground masks to hold out the truck so that clean plate gets composited nice and cleanly behind the truck.
Exactly.
Very, very, very cool example. And I think the coolest thing about this is that as we both know, and probably some of the people on this webinar, doing visual effects and kind of fixing these kind of shots, it can be very, very complex. So if you're going to do this in Nuke or in After Effects without Mocha, you would probably be stacking up many, many layers of effects. So what Mocha Pro is kind of doing in this remove module is simplifying the process, kind of like simplifying what could be a 20-step process into a much more refined, simpler process.
Yeah, what I like to say about Mocha Pro and in the remove module and insert modules in particular is that if you're an advanced visual effects artist, they allow you to cut your time in half. It would normally take you to create your shot. If you are not an advanced visual effects artist, it allows you to create some pretty advanced effects without having to have that background in visual effects.
Right, like you could kind of learn this Mocha Pro process, and even if you're working in Premiere or Avid Media Composer, you could even be, turn to your producer and say, yeah, I can remove that object.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about how to remove something with more than one clean plate and actually with a little bit of complex shadow overlay. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this snake tattoo from, let's just duplicate our original plate so that we can, there we are, put this here. All right, so we are going to remove the snake tattoo from this woman's neck. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to actually use two clean plates because we do actually have a subtle lighting shift happening, and we want to make sure that we capture that inside of Mocha. And we also want to make sure that we are following with the motion of her neck, okay? So we also need to rebuild the shadow under her hair and hold her hair back on top. So this is a slightly more complex version of what I just showed you. So we're going to keep building on our previous examples and show you how you get more and more complex with these techniques. So let's show you how that works. So the first thing I'm going to do, let's jump into our Mocha Pro, is we are going to launch Mocha Pro. And again, we apply that by going to Effect, Mocha by Imaginary Systems, Mocha Pro, or we can search for it over here in our Effect browser. Okay, now we're going to launch Mocha Pro. Mocha Pro is going to read our footage directly off of our timeline, just like this. And again, we're going to make sure that we are on our selected layer and not our inserts. Okay, so much like I did previously, I'm going to actually go ahead and track the background first because, again, I can't see behind the object. So because the object is part of the background, I'm going to use that as part of my track so that I get really good data. So we're going to go ahead and hit track forwards with translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. Now, why do we use translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective? So translation is really obvious. It's what the object is doing in X and Y. Again, rotation, super obvious. How is it rotating? And scale, really obvious. How is the object growing? But shear and perspective must be pull up, so let's talk about that. Shear is how the object is warping in just X and Y. Okay, so like a square becoming a diamond. And perspective is the addition of Z space to that warp. So do you see how that's tilting forward in space? That is perspective. If you don't see shear or perspective on your object, you should not use that in your tracking. Now we're going to go ahead and hit track forward. Now I've already baked this cake for you, so I'm probably not going to sit through this track because that's spending unnecessary time. So we're going to stop, we're going to delete that, and I'm going to show you what my background track ends up looking like. If we align our surface and grid tool to our background track here on our little snake track, let's just align this just like this. You can see that our track ends up being really accurate. You want to make sure that that track is glued to the object you're trying to replace because Mocha is machine and it is only as good as the data you give it. So garbage in, garbage out, excellence in, excellence out, okay? So let's go ahead and now we're going to draw our shape for our snake, and I'm going to show you how we did that because I want to talk a little bit about edge feathering with pixels. We're going to draw an object right around our little snake tattoo here, and we're going to talk a little bit about rotoscoping this type of object. We're going to use our X-splines. Here's why I like X-splines. If you relax for a curve, you get nice curves. If you pull tight, you get corners. So we're going to relax for a nice curve. I'm going to pull tight for a corner here, and I'm going to pull tight for a corner here. Okay, so that gives me a nice curve to my shapes with a little bit of a cutoff. Now, I'm going to use my pick edge, and I'm going to feather the edge of this shape. I'm doing this so that when I apply my mask to my remove, we'll get a nice soft blend between my mask and the other parts of this object. Now notice I'm really not doing much of a blend on this edge here. So this is per point edge feathering. So our mask is going to end up looking like that, all right? We want to make sure that we're using per point edge feathering because we want to make sure that we are not getting a blurry edge here, otherwise I would cut off part of my snake. We're going to call this snake tattoo, remove, and we are going to link this to our background. So now it's going to be linked to our background. And I can start to correct my roto shape. So I'm going to, I'm going to select, pick both, and I'm going to adjust my roto shape. Just like that. And so what this will do is this will give me the ability, let me just pull this out a little bit. This will give me the ability to remove this object with a clean line right along the edge of that neck. And I want to make sure that I'm fixing this little area here where I can see her hairline, just like that. It's really important that this roto be accurate because this is how your remove gets created. All right, so I feel really good about that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to create clean plates. So I'm actually going to go to my remove tool. And because the lighting changes from the beginning to the end, I'm going to hit create clean plate. And I'm going to, again, save this to my desktop, but you would never do that. You would save it to a folder in your pipeline. And I'm going to hit create clean plate here and do the very same thing. Back to my desktop. And now we can paint these in Photoshop. So if you look here, I have 361 and 408 automatically assigned for myself. Now, I already showed you how to paint in Photoshop, so I'm not going to go and dive into Photoshop again to replace this, but suffice to say, you use the clone tool to replace the snake, and then I used the heal tool to blend the edges, and I used some selections and eraser tools to blend back into the skin. So what that ends up looking like is this. Let's go to our remove and turn our edit clean plates on. You can see 361 and 408. We have our clean plates. So let's hit render inside of Mocha and just do a little quick test. And it's going to take a second to think about it because it's replacing a lot of pixels, and it's going to replace that object there. And let's go to the beginning and see what that looks like. All right, so that looks pretty good on both of those frames. I'm going to save it. I'm going to close it. And now I'm going to actually render it to my timeline by doing render remove. Let's just turn off our background here for a second. Render remove, turn Mocha on. And I'm actually going to select my visible layers, turn my background off, use snake only, and we're going to do apply matte. And that will apply my mask to my remove. And now we're going to turn our background layer on. So this is our remove over the top of our background. Now, obviously, this is not a final shot, and here's why. We've got this sharp line under her hairline. We need to blend that in. Okay, so if we want to blend that in, what we need to do, we actually need to slow this feather down to like maybe a 15 because I can see tattoo that we're removing. So that's why we got really close to that line. Let's do 5 actually. All right, so we're still softening this edge a little bit, you know, to sort of match the hair that we can see on the edge of her neck, but we are not, you know, cranking this up to like such a high level that we actually see the tattoo. All right, back down to 5. There we go. But you can see her hair right under here. So let's talk about how to fix that. Well, what I would do is I would take my my Mocha shot, and we're going to launch Mocha. We're going to go back to our selected layer, and I'm going to try to copy this shadow here. So let's do a little quick Rotoshape right under here. And let's track the edge of this hairline, just like this. Soften it. And you see how we're following that line there? We're going to call this shadow, and we're going to hit track forward. And this should track really quickly. Now, we're just tracking translations, scale, rotation, and shear. We don't really need to track perspective on this. I just want to get a nice smooth motion to follow this shadow. And we're again going to adjust our Rotoshape as well. So let's adjust our Rotoshape just like this. And let's see how that looks. All right, so that's an approximation of our shadow. We are going to export this shape data, and we are going to copy this to the clipboard. So selected layers, copy to the clipboard. And because I don't want the shadow to hold out of my, my snake, I'm going to move it below so that when we render, we're not holding this out. Let's hit save and close. And now I'm going to duplicate my original plate. I'm going to move it above, and I'm going to call this hair. I'm sorry, I'm going to call this hair shadow. I could also just make a solid to do this, but what we're going to do is we're going to do a fill. Let's go to Effect, and let's do a Generate Fill. Let's just find it over here. Fill, right here. And we're going to just do an eye, well, we were going to do an eyedropper. Let's turn that off. We're going to do an eyedropper to select the shadow. There we go. We're going to make sure that we are on our first layer. We're going to go to Edit, Paste Mocha Mask, and we're going to feather this a little bit. Let's go to Masks, Shadow, and we're going to feather this right inside of our pasted effect. Now we could also use Mocha to apply the effect, but I just did it with copy and paste. Let's do a nice soft shadow edge. And are there any questions, Ross?
Yeah, there's been tons and tons of questions, but I think that I think you're doing great, and I believe I've been answering most of the questions via text. So
okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So now we're just going to go in here, and I'm going to actually hit darken so that we're not darkening the rest of the shadow. And we're going to go ahead and put our hair back over the top. So we would put the hair back over with another Rotoshape. So again, I would do that very same thing where I would duplicate our layer. And we're going to duplicate our layer, move it above, and I'm going to select my remove, launch, and we're going to start some rotoscoping. So we're going to draw a shape right around our hair. Actually, can you answer a question really quick?
Sure. All right, so Mary is okay. I guess Mary is taking a quick break. Apologize that she's battling a cold, but I'm going to answer a couple quick questions while Mary's off. One is that someone is just asking, how does the Mocha team recommend how you shoot phone screens for replacements? Everyone here knows that Mocha is used quite a bit for tracking iPhone and mobile phone and laptop screens, that kind of thing. Generally, we recommend just leaving the screen turned off in gray. That way you're going to be able to comp reflections much better. Um, some people do put tracking markers or put green screens. Personally, I think that you're going to get the best compositing result by leaving the screen gray, and then you'll get more natural reflections.
Yeah, that's
Um,
absolutely right. And I think I would further add that you can also just leave it on a like medium tone gray screen if you want to have the light reflect on you as well, unless you are zooming totally into the screen, in which case you would definitely want to make sure that you use tracking markers, because if you're zooming so far into the screen that you don't have the edges anymore, that's going to be a problem to track.
Yeah,
Thank you,
it
Ross,
really
for that
depends
break.
on how much occlusion or how much foreground motion is going to be in front of your replacement. There are certain, I don't want to dismiss keying, and there's definitely times for keying as well.
100%, that's absolutely true. And I'm sorry for the break, guys. I had to get a drink of water really quick, and I didn't think you guys wanted to listen to that. Um, So unless you're like into ASMR like sound stuff, which I am not, we're gonna make
Hey,
a little quick.
hey, Mary, while you're kind of doing that, maybe you could just answer. Someone had a question. Um, why did you create more than one clean plate for this particular shot?
So I tried to address that in the beginning, but it's because there's a slight lighting shift, and I want it to blend between the two, but I don't want to have actually use illumination modeling on this shot. And the reason for that is because if I used illumination modeling on this shot for the remove, I would pull all of this dark data down into the nice clean light area here, because it's right next to an area of high contrast. So that's why.
Cool. Yeah, yeah. So
Um,
sometimes if you're as you scroll through your shot and you're looking at all your frames, if there's drastic lighting shifts or depending on the image, just one frame is not going to cut it. But that's actually the power of this remove module with the clean plates, is that the way that it can interpolate these clean frames, painted frames across a shot.
Yeah, absolutely, and it does it pixel by pixel. I'm sorry, I hit remove there, and I needed to hit track. Um, so the reason for that, is because it's blending pixel by pixel, and you end up with really nice results when you're done. So once we are done with our shadow track, we can actually go ahead and do a really quick rotoscoping track for this hair. Um, the nice thing about this is that we can let's just adjust this really quick. Perfect, and let's just come in here and replace this. Great. And I'm actually going to come in here and I'm going to use add, and we're going to just add a little bit of texture there. I don't want a straight line all the way across it. We're going to take this, we're going to call it hair. And again, I'm going to export my shape data, Mocha shape data for After Effects. I'm going to turn this off, drag it underneath. We're going to save this and close it. And then we're going to paste this data right back over the top. So save it and close it. We're going to take our original plate here. We're going to rename this to hair replace. And we're going, excuse me, hair replace with one E. And we're going to make sure we're on our first frame and go to edit, paste Mocha mask. I could also just copy and paste the effect for the remove, and then use the matte from that. And we can actually just come in and make another shape to replace this whole side of the neck as well. So what we're going to end up with is something that looks like this. So here's our remove. Here's our darkened hair shadow. Let's make sure that our remove is on. There we are. And let's go to, let's get this to remove. Well, whatever, we're gonna drop it underneath. Why are you not rendering? Let's find out. Let's go to our, oh, that's why, snake. Let's just delete these. Let's go to snake. Let's go to remove. Let's hit render. Perfect. We're going to save and close that. I think we had a caching error, so we're just going to make sure that's removing. Great.
Cool.
We're going to apply our shadow over the top, and we're going to replace our hair over the top. So here's our before, and here's our after, just like that.
Very nicely done, Mary. I think this is really, someone like myself, comes from, some of the old school high-end systems like flame work, or people see Nuke artists doing this kind of work, but be doing this kind of in-depth beauty work and skin corrections inside of Adobe is very cool workflow. So, personally,
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
the combo of Mocha Pro plugin running inside of Adobe After Effects makes a very, very powerful solution.
It does. And if you have any sort of sins that you need to hide in this sort of beauty work, I highly recommend that you come over here and you use Beauty Studio, which is a BCC Beauty Studio, and you can use it over the top, and it'll do even more to blend your original matte, your original little remove painting that you did into the rest of your shot, so it'll be completely invisible and seamless. So that's a really good way to hide any miscellaneous sins in your remove.
Well, while
So.
you're bringing up your next example, Mary, I'm going to jump in and answer a couple more questions.
Mm-hmm.
As you're doing that example, we've had a couple of questions about different hosts.
Okay.
People have asked if this is working in Resolve or Fusion, and the short answer for Mocha Pro running on OFX is that we support Nuke, we support Fusion, we support Vegas Pro, and we support HitFilm. Unfortunately, the way that Resolve is giving us access is the way Resolve is set up as an OFX host. A lot of Mocha Pro actually works inside of Resolve, but the remove module does not. So that's why we don't say that we officially support the DaVinci Resolve with Mocha Pro yet. That said, I would also point out that anyone here who is using Sapphire or Boris Continuum plugins, that we do have a light version of Mochas inside almost every version of all of our tools now. So, inside of Resolve, you can be running Boris Continuum plugins or Sapphire plugins, and you can be using the Mocha inside those plugins for effects isolation and masking.
Right. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is really complex removes. So this is the kind of remove that people look at and they tend to say, oh, this is easy. Mocha can handle this right away. It's right over a plane. Except for here's why it's not. Look at that shadow going over the top. That actually completely messes our remove up. And the reason for that is because Mocha, while it being really good at adjusting for lighting, is not really good at adjusting for lighting when that lighting is super sharp and cutting across my image. We treat that actually like an occlusion. And that's really hard to think about because it's transparent, but that shadow is actually an occlusion. Same thing goes for really harsh reflections as well. Think of it in terms of layers, like transparent layers moving over the top of one another. If this was like cell animation, So that means that what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to track this background, which we can totally track this background, no problem, but we're going to have to make a pretty complex remove over the top to make this happen. And you can see that we have quite a bit of layers in here. We're going to talk about how we do this. We've got about, let's see, yeah, we got about 10 more minutes, so I think I can do this. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to track this first. So we're going to remove these numbers on the side of the truck, just like this, and let's talk about it. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you sit through a bunch of I'm not going to make you sit through a bunch of rotoscoping. I'm going to kind of already bake that cake for you, but I am going to show you how it's done. So that's what we end up with when we are done. Now, here's how this is going to work. Let's take our original layer and let's go ahead and apply Mocha Pro, drag and drop it right onto our timeline, and launch. And what we're going to do is we're going to track this background. So we're going to draw a shape right around our background, and we're going to track this whole thing. Now I'm tracking the whole side of the car. The reason for that, in fact, I might even actually come over here and track this side of the car as well, as much as I can. The reason for that is I want to be able to avoid this shadow area. I want to be able to lock to this area, even though the shadow is moving over the top. We're going to track, I think, translation, scale, and rotation only. And we're going to hit track forward. I'm going to increase this value quite a bit so that we look through the shadow and only follow this texture. And we're going to call this truck track. And let's go ahead and turn our surface tool on and align that to the area we're trying to remove, just like this. And we're going to turn our grid tool on and we're going to hit track forward. And now if we've done everything correctly, what we'll do is we'll track through this object while focusing on these side textures and not really caring that this shadow is interrupting our track. So I want to make sure that makes sense to everybody. We are tracking the texture here. And because we're tracking the texture, I've actually gone ahead and turned shear and perspective off because this shadow will actually interrupt that. And we're going, because basically Mocha tries to invent that data where it doesn't belong if you tell it it belongs there. So since this is not really tilting a lot in Z space, we're going to ignore using shear and perspective. Otherwise, Mocha would treat this shadow as data that was relevant to that warp. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you can see that we held through that shadow really, really well, which is nice. So once we've done that, we can actually draw a nice top layer to replace this object with. So I'm going to let this finish tracking, and then we're going to link a layer right back to this track. And I'm going to talk about how I set that up. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we hide our remove in the seam on the side of this truck. Otherwise, if we were just trying to remove the small section, I would probably remove all the way up to here and then do a soft blend between the two. It depends on what your shot is as to how you get to hide your remove. So once that's finished, I'm going to turn my grid and surface tool off, and I'm going to zoom in. So now I'm going to take my X-spline and I'm going to draw a shape. Notice I'm hiding that seam, and I'm going to hide along the edge of this shadow as well. Now this is important because this is going to make my remove work very well. So once that is complete, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call this numbers remove. And we're actually going to link this to our truck track. And if we need to, we're going to correct our roto shapes just a little bit, just like that. So that is my nice roto shape on the side of my truck. And there's my background track that I'm linking my track to. Obviously, I can't see behind the numbers. So now I need to find a section where I can see the most of the numbers, which is going to be like right here. Okay. And I'm going to hit my remove tab, and I'm going to hit create clean plate, and I'm going to save myself a clean plate. Now, I've actually already baked this cake for you, so I'm not going to make you sit through for that. We're going to close this, and we're going to actually jump on a remove over here, and I'm going to show you how I set this up. So here's my remove layer, and there's my background layer, and we actually have our clean plate right here from frame 10. All right, I've already painted this in Photoshop. I use the heal tool to paint the numbers out. I use the clone tool to paint the numbers out, and I use the heal tool to fill in the texture back over the top. It's pretty self-explanatory. We're gonna hit OK, and we're gonna hit render to do our test render, and you can see that we are removing the background using clean plates only and using our clean plate. Now, I want to talk about why we do not use linear or illumination modeling here. Let's find a nice section where we have shadow over the top, like here. Watch what happens if I hit linear illumination modeling. Mocha is going to look at all of the pixels around this remove spline, And what we're going to do is we're going to raise and lower all of the pixels inside of this spline based on the values of the pixels around it, and that's all of the values. So if you've ever used the heal tool in Photoshop and seen, like, you know, if you've been like photoshopping something that's a light right next to a dark, you use the heal tool, you get a gray. That's exactly what happens here when you use linear illumination modeling. We're going to hit render and look. That is not ideal because it's not quite as dark as this and it's not quite as bright as this. It's tried to find a halfway value between them. Not what we want. If we hit interpolate and we hit render, Mocha's going to try to blend from here to here, but again, it's not perfect because it's only using these pixels here at the very edge, and those are actually darker than these pixels up here because it's hidden in the seam. So what you'll end up with is an absolute mess if you end up trying to work that way. So we're going to actually go back to none, and now we're going to render this nice clean side of the truck. And we're going to have to rotoscope over the side of this truck for our shadows. So we're going to save this and close it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to render this back to our timeline by checking render remove, and we're going to apply the matte for a remove only by hitting apply matte. So that's going to be our remove. All right. Now, excuse me. I'm going to now start to rotoscope my shadows. So here's how we rotoscope shadows. I'm not going to make you sit through this. There is no good way to track and roto these shadows. You pretty much have to do it by hand. So what this is hand rotoscoping of the shadows. What I did is I essentially, let's just hide this for a second. So I found a good place to start on the shadows. I drew a nice roto shape around them. And I started rotoscoping this by hand. So we went to, like, you know, a couple of frames ahead, moved this forwards. You know, I used things like the shear tool to try to, you know, match this. Same thing for here. And then adjusted the pixels by hand on the fly over and over and over again. So really exciting stuff. It's just the kind of thing that you got to do by hand. So what we've done is we have made these lovely rotoscoping shapes for our shadows, just like this. And they don't have to be perfect, but what they do have to be is they have to be right in line with where the top of the shadows break. So you see how this is following this edge perfectly. We don't care about this edge. We care about this edge and below, and this edge and below, okay? So we're going to save this, and we're going to close it, because I think this took about 20 minutes or so to, I think about 20 minutes to rotoscope, maybe 30, and you don't want to sit through that. So now we're going to apply our matte right to our timeline. And I do want to point out one thing. Ross, do we have any questions while I'm doing this?
Yeah, no, I think there's been tons of questions, but really, really positive comments coming in, Mary. So I think you did an amazing job. You know, we've covered so much in such a short time. It's really cool to see a more in-depth example like this one, where you're removing an object, but you also then are comping the foreground or comping the shadows back on top with some opacity. Very, very cool stuff.
Okay.
There's been a lot of questions about Mocha VR and sort of different sales questions. Just want to iterate that Mocha VR, well, basically everything that Mary is showing, object removal on regular video, does work in 360 video, and you would need Mocha VR for that. Mocha VR is available as an upgrade if you already own Mocha Pro. Just to be very clear, if you own Mocha VR, you basically have all the features in Mocha Pro. You don't need both. So Mocha VR is the top of the line that you can use that for 360 footage as well as for regular footage.
All right.
Yeah, let me see if there's any other questions. There's a question that kept coming back about interpolating clean plates. I think that we've determined that that's a feature request to be able to manually say exactly which frames, clean frames, are interpolated where and when in time. But beyond that, I think we're pretty good.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you for answering those while we were worried about that. So what we can do here is we can start to create a shadow over the top of our remove. So, so here is our remove, okay? and you can see it's right over our original plates. Now we're going to apply our shadows over the top. We can do this one of two ways. We can either duplicate our layer, or we can apply our matte. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy this effect really quick, and we're going to go to, I'm just going to do a new solid as opposed to a fill, and we're going to do a new solid. I'm going to select a nice shadow color, just like this, and we're going to paste our effect. We're going to do matte, and we're going to go to apply our matte over the top. So here's our shadow mattes right here. Let's let that catch up. One thing I want to point out about our mattes is that we are actually using motion blur on this. So if you go into your effect, you can come in here to your Uber key. You can actually apply motion blur to your layers. So what you'll see here is that we are applying that motion blur to our matte, so we get that motion for free, so it makes it match a little bit better. All right, we're going to take this and we're going to go ahead and we can use a soft light, or we can use a multiply to put our shadow back over the top. It's going to depend on what your preference is for your blending mode. I'm going to go back to soft light, and I'm going to use multiply. And I'm just going to take this value down. So we're going to go to transform, and I'm going to take the opacity down on this to like maybe 50. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually further isolate this mask. So we're going to actually go to our original remove, and I'm going to select my remove roto shape, and I'm going to actually export our shape data. I'm going to do Mocha shape data for After Effects, copy to clipboard. I'm going to go to layer, new solid, doesn't matter what color the solid is. I'm going to move it up here. We're going to go to our first frame. We're going to do edit, paste Mocha mask, and you can do this a bunch of different ways. You can also use the intersection of the masks to do this, but I'm going to show you how to use track mats. We're going to use an alpha mat to isolate this. So now our shadows are limited to this section, and we can actually start to adjust our values a little bit better now that we can see them not stacked on top of one another. So let's see what this looks like at 100%. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about that, but what I am also going to do is I'm going to go to my layer solid settings, and I feel like I just want to pick a slightly different color for my solid, make sure that I'm using the right color. Now, I'm still not happy from here to here, so what can I do? I can go to Effect, and I can go to Generate, and we're going to do a quick little ramp. Where's my ramp? I'm just going to find it. Gradient ramp, that's what it's called. Drag and drop it onto our effect. We're going to do a little begin point and end point. I'm going to select my color here and there. And that's going to give us a little bit more realistic shadow matching. Okay, let's do like a 90%. Way better. Okay, so now my shadow is nice and matching on the top of my object. And now what we can do is we can actually blend this back over the top. Okay, we can start to blend this back in with the rest of our shot now that our shadow matches. So all we've done for that is we've actually just gone ahead and added our lens flare back in over the top of our shot. We do that by just doing a quick little mask here. And we're linking this to our original track that we made, right? We're saving that.
Really,
and we're applying
actually,
that back over the
it's
top.
cool that you're covering that, because a couple times people are asking about link to track. So I like the way you just showed that you already had the car tracked. You don't need to retrack it. So you just wanted to link that new mask shape to the same tracking data.
Right, it's the exact same thing that I did in a previous version. So I've got my two shapes that I wanted to make, and I've got my remove track here on the background. We just take this and then link to track. We link it to the remove, and that's that. So now we're compositing all of that back over the top. What we end up with is here's our original and here's our remove. So that is how we would tackle this really complex effect. And I talked about where we would use illumination modeling and where we wouldn't, where we would have to rebuild shadows and where we would, what is appropriate for this sort of remove, how you do clean plates. We really hope you guys enjoyed this, because that is a start to finish breakdown of the remove module.
Yeah, Mary, that was a really excellent example. I really appreciate this one because people are always asking us, they see some of the simple removes that we do, but to see like a more real world example like this, where you're removing that logo but retaining the realistic shadows with motion blur on top of it, really awesome job. I also
Well,
really
thank you.
appreciate the way that you kind of used Mocha Pro plugin as almost like a little Swiss Army knife, and came back to it for different a couple different masking, remove, all in the one comp. So that's very cool.
Thanks. Well, I really think that if you use Mocha every day, if you use it on everyday shots, not just like a fire extinguisher, if you use it all the time, you will get used to using it and you will double your workflow. You'll be so much faster. It's because you use it for things like masking, you use it for things like quick tracks, you use it to link things back to one another, and you end up saving yourself a lot of time because you don't have to do those steps over and over and over and over again. And another thing that I want to point out is that a lot of times people think the remove tool is magic. The remove tool is not magic. It does exactly what you tell it to do. It's just important that you give it the right information to help you finish your shot.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just reiterate kind of what you're saying, because both of us go on site and meet a lot of users. And, when you invest in yourself and kind of learn some of these core features, ultimately you're going to just have skills and a way to handle more shots. So I think that this webinar is really great, and we're getting great feedback from all the users. And Mary, you're very well loved because many of the users are saying they hope you feel better, and
Oh,
people have been very impressed that you've been able to handle this webinar, with your cold and everything. So
oh, well, thanks,
at this
guys.
point, I would just kind of reiterate a couple cool things about this webinar. Number one is, yes, we always record these webinars, and we share the replays. Typically, they're on our website, our Vimeo, our YouTube, and our Facebook pages within, really within 48 hours. We'll have the webinar replay. That way you can go at take your own speed if you want to review any of the topics that Mary covered. Since we're running out of time, I'm just going to say that we are going to be announcing the winners. We're going to send the winners to the prize winners directly. We'll also announce that on our social media as well. So thank you all. Remember, you can always check out Mocha Pro and Mocha VR or any of the other tools on the Boris Effects website. You can download them. You can try them for 15 days. And, we're here to help. So feel free to get in touch. Okay, thanks a lot, Mary.
All right, thank you, Ross. Bye.
Okay, bye.